I'm Mr. Loomis. Welcome back for our third lesson of this unit. This lesson is longer than most, but that's because the reformers of the Gilded Age did so much to improve America. Last time we talked about writers, and we learned how the muckrakers uncovered problems in American society. Well, that was just the beginning. It's time to learn about the populists and progressives. Before we jump into their story, let's take a look at our topics. We'll begin with a group of farmers we call the populists. Then we'll get into the progressives and how they worked on political reform, the creation of the income tax, and something we call the social gospel movement. We'll talk about their efforts to make us safer at work, to stop child labor, to improve schools, and how they started the conservation movement. Let's get started. Like the factory workers of the eastern cities who organized unions in the Gilded Age, farmers in the West also decided to work together to improve their lives. In 1867, the first national organization was started. The Patrons of Husbandry, also known as the Grange, was the first group that ran social events to help farming families feel less lonely. Over time, as farmers talked to each other, they realized that they often shared many of the same problems, and the Grange groups started working for political change also. For farmers, the railroads were the number one enemy. Farmers had only one way to get the things they grew to the shoppers in the city, the railroads. And the owners of the railroads could make the farmers pay high rates to ship their products. Grangers got several states to pass laws that set limits on how much railroads could charge. Grangers also put their money together to build grain elevators of their own so they didn't have to pay the railroads to store their grain. What did all the farmers seem to have in common? The answer was simple: debt. Many farmers had borrowed money from big city banks to pay for seeds and tools. Trying to find ways to make it easier to pay back the money they owed was important to farmers, and changing the way the government printed money was one solution. At that time, the government only printed money if it had gold to match every dollar. This meant that there could only be a certain number of dollars, which was good for bankers. The farmers wanted inflation, which is when the value of the money goes down. When this happens, every dollar is worth less than before, so everything starts to cost more. Inflation actually helps debtors. If a farmer owes $3,000 and can earn $1 for every bushel of wheat sold, he needs to sell 3,000 bushels to pay off the debt. If inflation could push the price of a bushel of wheat up to $3, he needs to sell only 1,000 bushels. Of course, inflation is bad for the bankers who made the loans. To create inflation, farmers wanted the government to start printing money backed by silver as well as gold. To convince leaders to make this change, farmers organized the Populist Party. And it wasn't just the free coinage of silver that the populists wanted. They also wanted a graduated income tax. This is when people who make more money have to pay a larger percentage in taxes. They wanted constitutional reforms as well. Up until this point, senators were still not elected by the people directly. They were chosen by state legislatures. The populists wanted to change the Constitution so that the people could vote directly for their senators. They wanted other reforms to make government work better for the people, such as the initiative, where people can force the legislatures in government to vote on a law. Another populist idea was the referendum, which would let people vote on a law on election day. In this way, the people could pass laws that legislatures, who might be taking money from rich businessmen, would not. Finally, they wanted the power to recall people in government before their term ended. They also called for a secret ballot and a one-term limit for the president. When it came time to elect a new president in 1896, it seemed like the populists might be able to win. 4 years before, their candidate James Weaver had not won, but he had done well. By 1896, populist ideas were being talked about by people all over the country. Also, the economy was not doing well, and voters were angry. James S. Coxey, a populist from Ohio, had gone to Washington, D.C. with his 200 supporters in 1894 to protest. Called Coxey's Army, he and his followers were getting people excited about change. All that the populace needed was a candidate who could carry their message. In the end, he wasn't a populist, but a Democrat that the populace picked. William Jennings Bryan was a lawyer from Lincoln, Nebraska. Known as the Great Commoner, Bryan was a great speaker and was remembered as a defender of the farmers. In 1896, Bryan gave the most famous speech of his life. Asking for the government to print money based on silver, Bryan yelled, "You shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold." And at only age 36, the boy orator was picked by the Democrats as their candidate to run for president. Instead of picking their own candidate, the populists chose Bryan also, and the populists and the Democrats joined together. The Republicans picked William McKinley, the governor of Ohio, to be their candidate. The bankers and businessmen liked him. One rich businessman named Mark Hanna decided to make sure McKinley won. He, like many rich men, thought that the free coinage of silver would hurt America, or it would at least hurt him and other rich men. Using his money and power, Hanna worked to make people afraid of Bryan. Hanna changed the way political campaigns worked by starting a nationwide whistle-stop effort, making 20 to 30 speeches every day from the back of a train as it stopped in each town. In the end, McKinley beat Bryan by electoral vote of 271 to 176. The popular vote was much closer. McKinley won 51% of the vote to Bryan's 47. Many things helped McKinley win. He won every state in the populous and industrial Northeast. Factory workers were afraid of the free coinage of silver idea as much as their bosses. While inflation would help the farmers who were in debt, it could hurt the factory workers who would be able to buy less with the money they earned, but would still have to pay rent for their apartments. In a way, the election came down to a fight between the people of the cities and the farmers. By 1896, the cities won. Bryan's campaign was the last time a major party tried to win the White House by trying to only win the votes of farmers. Even though the populist favorite candidate didn't win the election, their ideas lasted. The free silver idea died, but the graduated income tax, direct election of senators, initiative, referendum, recall, and the secret ballot were all later turned into law. These ideas were kept alive by the next group of reformers, the Progressives. The Progressives were usually educated, middle-class Protestant men and women from the cities of the Northeast. It was more of a movement than a political party, and there were progressives in each political party. There were three progressive presidents: Theodore Roosevelt, William Howard Taft, and Woodrow Wilson. Roosevelt and Taft were Republicans, and Wilson was a Democrat. What all progressives had in common was that they didn't like the laissez-faire social Darwinist ideas that had been common in the first part of the Gilded Age. Progressives thought that people and the government should work to fix problems in business and society. And what they did was amazing. Almost every part of society was changed by the progressives. They helped workers, the poor, and customers, and started the conservation movement. They worked to make alcohol illegal and give women the right to vote. They worked to clean up corruption in government and added 4 amendments to the Constitution. One big idea behind progressivism was that the people stopped liking social Darwinism. Why should people have to just put up with living a hard life? They felt that people should not have to just put up with injustices or accept the bad situations as the way things had to be, especially if they could think of a way to fix problems. Philosopher William James called this new way of thinking pragmatism, and his followers decided that social reform and government could solve problems. To help us understand how this worked, let's take a look at one group of progressives. In the Gilded Age, old Protestant churches were losing influence. Many immigrants were Roman Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, or Jewish. Afraid that they were going to be less important in society, some Protestants started to think about how they could make a bigger difference in their cities and show that their religion had something to offer. This grew into the social gospel movement. Progressive-minded preachers began to tie the teachings of Christianity with problems outside the churches. Good Christians, they said, worked to help the poor and the needy on earth. Many ministers got involved in politics. Washington Gladden, the most famous of the social gospel ministers, helped the workers and the unions. Ministers called for an end to child labor and new laws to make alcohol illegal and to clean up government. The Young Men's Christian Association, YMCA, and the Young Women's Christian Association, YWCA, were started by Christian progressives to help young people living in those growing cities. Two new groups were started. Mary Baker Eddy's Christian Science tried to show how religion and science could go together. And the Salvation Army crossed the Atlantic from England and worked to help the poor. More of a service organization than the church, the Salvation Army still does good work in many American cities. Middle-class women who had time and money got most involved in progressive social reform. The settlement house movement is one example. Women organized and built settlement houses in cities so that homeless immigrants could have someplace to go. Settlement houses had family-style meals, lessons in how to speak English, and tips on how to make it in America. The first settlement house began in 1889 in Chicago and was called Hull House. Its leader, Jane Addams, wanted Hull House to be an example that progressives in other cities could copy. By 1900, there were about 100 settlement houses all over America. People remember Jane Addams as the founder of social work, a new job or a profession. Next, let's tell the story of one of America's worst tragedies, but also learn how it turned out to have a positive impact on America overall. The Triangle Shirtwaist Fire on March 25, 1911, was one of the worst disasters in American history. 146 workers died. Most of the victims were new Jewish and Italian immigrant women, aged 16 to 23. The owners of the factory were worried that the women would take extra breaks or steal fabric, so they locked the doors each morning. But when the fire started, many of the workers could not escape the burning building. Some jumped to the streets below from the 8th, 9th, and 10th floors. The fire led to new laws about workplace safety and helped start a new union for women making clothing. In New York City, a committee on public safety was started to find out why so many women had to die and to try to get new laws passed to fix those problems. The famous social worker Frances Perkins was the leader of the committee. They helped get laws passed to give workers the weekends off, to require that buildings have fire escapes, and generally this led to safer working conditions for all of us. Similar reforms were made into law all around the country. One of the most important reforms of the Progressive Era was the end of child labor. The National Child Labor Committee, or NCLC, worked to get anti-child labor laws passed by Congress. Their first bill didn't pass, but more and more people started to think that children should be in school instead of in factories. President William Taft helped them by creating the Children's Bureau, a government agency that worked to end child labor. In 1916, Senator Robert Owen of Oklahoma and Representative Edward Keating of Colorado introduced the NCLC-backed Keating-Owen Act, which said that no product could be made with child labor in one state and then sold in another state. Since Congress can regulate business between states, it was a way to get most businesses that wanted to sell their products in many states to stop using children as workers. President Woodrow Wilson signed the law, but in 1918, the Supreme Court said in Hammer v. Dagenhart that the law was unconstitutional. The justices said that they thought child labor was wrong, but said that Congress had gone too far. The Constitution, the court said, didn't give Congress the power to regulate trade that much. The NCLC then tried to pass a constitutional amendment. In 1924, Congress passed the Child Labor Amendment, but not enough states voted to ratify it, so the Constitution still doesn't protect against child labor. Finally, in 1938, the National Child Labor Committee helped get Congress to vote for the Fair Labor Standards Act, or FSLA, which included some protections against child labor. The law says children under the age of 16 cannot work, and that children under the age 18 cannot work in dangerous jobs. However, the law allows children to work on farms and to work for their families. Even today, the FSLA is the main protection against child labor. Students who want to work during the school year must first get a work permit from their school. Some students think this is inconvenient, but it is an important protection against the child labor problems of the past. The progressives also wanted to make America's schools better. Business owners wanted smarter, better workers, and many people thought that good, free public schools were the key to making democracy work. After all, a government that was based on people voting would not work if most of the people were not educated and could not make good decisions on election day. Church leaders and reformers worried about children and thought that a strong education was not only good, but something children had a right to. People working to end child labor wanted laws to make schools required until children were older. If a child was in school, he or she could not also be in the factory. In 1870, about a half of the country's children did not go to any sort of school. Although many states had free public schools for children between the ages of 5 and 21, the reality was that many children worked in mines, factories, or on the farm because their families needed the money. Only 6 states had laws that made it illegal for children to miss school. Massachusetts was the leader in passing new education laws. By 1890, all children in Massachusetts between the ages of 6 and 10 had to attend school at least 20 weeks per year. And by the turn of the century, all the states in the North and the West had passed compulsory education laws, with only the South lagging behind. There, under the laws of Jim Crow, the public schools in the South were segregated by race. However, even in the South, by 1918, laws were passed that required children to attend school. Other ideas to improve schools became popular also. German immigrants brought the idea of kindergartens with them when they came to America, and soon many cities were adding kindergartens to their school. The most famous reformer of the time was John Dewey. Dewey thought that students didn't need to memorize facts and formulas. Instead, Dewey wanted the children to learn through experiments and activities and play. Dewey also said America needed what he called normal schools. These were colleges just for future teachers. By 1900, 1 in 5 public school teachers had a college degree. More and more high schools were built at the end of the 1800s. The total number of public high schools went from 160 to 6,000, but there was still a long way to go. In 1900, only 4% of American children went to high school. For most Americans working on farms and in factories, an 8th grade education was enough. Colleges were changing as well. In the 1860s, states started paying for land for new universities, and philanthropists such as Stanford and Vanderbilt also paid to build new universities. The chance for women to go to college also went up. Mount Holyoke, Smith, Vassar, Wellesley, and Bryn Mawr colleges were opened just for women. By 1910, 40% of America's college students were women, even though they were not allowed to have most jobs. African Americans also had a chance to go to college, although not with white students. Instead, colleges such as Howard, Fisk, and Atlanta University opened to teach black students. As we already mentioned, populist ideas about fixing the government were popular with many Americans. Progressives fought for the political reforms, such as the secret ballot, initiative, referendum, and recall. Most of these reforms were passed into laws by states, not the federal government in Washington, D.C. Under Governor Robert La Follette, Wisconsin became the first state to try out many of these new ideas, so other states could see an example to copy. The populist ideas of an income tax and direct election of senators became the 16th Amendment and 17th Amendment to the United States Constitution during this time. Reformers went further to try to get rid of corruption in cities by changing the way city governments worked. The city commission and the city manager systems make it so elected leaders vote to spend money, but it's the professional managers who decide who to hire. These reforms took power away from political machines like New York's Tammany Hall. Progressives also started to think about America's natural resources. In 1892, John Muir started the Sierra Club to try to protect some of the country's most beautiful places. At first, few people would listen to him. Then Theodore Roosevelt became president, and things changed. Roosevelt loved being outside. He hunted, hiked, and camped whenever he could. He thought that living in nature was good for the body and the soul. As president, he worked hard to protect America's natural resources. First law he supported was the Newlands Reclamation Act of 1902. This law used tax money to help people become farmers on lands that did not have enough water. If they were willing to stay and work the land, the government would help them build irrigation systems to provide the water they needed. John Muir and Teddy Roosevelt got along well and became friends. In 1903, Roosevelt went camping with Muir. The two agreed that some places were so beautiful that they should never be turned into farms or cities. Roosevelt used his power as president to protect millions of acres of land. By 1916, there were 16 national parks in America. Today, Teddy Roosevelt is remembered as the first conservation president. The Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, groups first started in England, became popular in America. Adults joined conservation and wildlife clubs. That was quite a story. Before we close out, let's recap our big ideas. Populist farmers in the West wanted the government to regulate railroads, print money based on silver, and pass laws to end corruption. Their champion was William Jennings Bryan, who didn't become president, but many of their ideas eventually became laws anyway. After the populists, progressives worked on problems such as workplace safety, child labor, education reform, and conservation. Progressives passed the 16th and 17th Amendments that created an income tax and provided for the direct election of senators. Before this, the state legislatures had elected the senators. Some progressives were inspired by religion and joined the social gospel movement. They created the YMCA and YWCA. They built settlement houses to help the waves of new immigrants and started the Salvation Army to serve the poor. As we learn about the people of the Gilded Age and how they changed America for the better, there's one last story we need to tell. The story of American women and how they won the right to vote. I'll tell you all about it next time. See you then.